That's the weird thing, was that from minute one, I wanted to be an actor from when I was 3 or something, and which is to invite people to look at you, but I didn't want anyone to look at me. I wanted to be smaller and take up less space. But maybe, it's only in hindsight, maybe I realized if I could pretend to be somebody else, I could be more, have a fuller life if I could pretend to be someone else.
Because you started with modeling as well, which is the ultimate look at me.
Right, exactly.
Just about unwanted looking, though, it's interesting. A lot of your writing, a lot of your work is about women, but it's the advice from a male co-star quite early on, Dustin Hoffman. He gives you a line if you are going to have unwanted advances from male co-stars. Tell us about that.
Yes, he was giving me advice every day when I was working with him, and he said, never sleep with your co-stars. It's just a bad idea. It's not good. So here's what you say. And he told me to say, thank you. You're very attractive. I would love to, but I don't want to ruin the sexual tension between us. And then I had to use it on somebody who was Jack Nicholson.
Yeah, not just anyone. It was Jack Nicholson.
It was Jack Nicholson. I was still, I had done Tootsie, but I was also still a model. And my modeling agent took me and a couple other models who were also actresses or wanted to be actresses to LA, and he knew Jack Nicholson for some reason. And so every night we had dinner with Jack Nicholson for this week. And then one time I got back home to the hotel, and there was a message, Gina, please call Jack Nicholson. I was like, call Jack Nicholson? Okay. Hello, Mr. Nicholson. This is Gina, the model. And he says, hey, Gina, when's it gonna happen? I was like, why didn't I realize this was gonna be what it was about? But then I was like, I know what to say. And so I said, well, Jack, I have a feeling that we're going to be working together someday, and I would hate to have ruined the sexual tension between us. And he was like, oh, man, where'd you get that from? But it worked.
Did you say Dustin Hoffman, or you kept it to yourself?
I didn't.
Okay, because I mean, what's interesting about that line, and in the book, you are exploring your responses and criticizing yourself as well at times. You call yourself a wimp. You say all these sorts of things. And of course, it's the power of hindsight and experience. But that particular line Dustin Hoffman gave you is still about flattering the male ego.
Yes, exactly. Because it included, I would love to, you're very attractive,
So would you still use that sort of line, or what do you make of that? Has it stood the test of time?
Well, no, I wouldn't need that line now. I just say, nah, whatever. But
I suppose it shows the precariousness of the women's role in these working environments.
That he felt it would be necessary for me to boost their ego at the same time, instead of saying, no, I'm not interested in you,
Yes.
Yeah.
Bloomberg has enhanced search on the terminal to deliver what you need when you need it. Now, you can simply type phrases in everyday English in the command line. Compare financials, find people, analyze markets. You can enter or ask questions. What do you know today? Ask a question or visit SearchGo to find answers now. Access the financial world on demand. Hear from leading economists, policymakers, and industry experts via live and on-demand webinars, only from Bloomberg. Start exploring to see what's moving the markets. Visit Bloomberg.com/webinars.
The top names in climate change are on Bloomberg.
I want everybody committed to the kind of action that we need. We have a global, we're still putting 162 million tons. that are
Global Business Authority.
One of the men that you also write about is Bill Murray. And you talk about working with him, and you describe, I mean, I thought I'd let you describe it, an incident that goes on against your consent.
Right.
How would you describe what happened?
Right. Well, it was inappropriate from minute one of meeting him. I had gone to a hotel to meet with him. He was the director of this movie also. And there was a co-director there and a producer. So it wasn't like a booby trap or something where I was going to be alone with him in a hotel suite. But as soon as I walked in, he said, "Have you ever tried the thumper?" Which was some. No. Try it. And I was like, no. You know what that was about.
And I mean, would you describe that? How would you describe that?
Well, it turned out later that I found out that he was worried I was going to be think that I was all that because I had just won an Oscar, and that I would be on the set and think, you know, that I'm superior to people. I don't know what he thought, but that was to see if he could make me do something I didn't want to do.
Okay, which is a real power play and very uncomfortable.
It's a huge power play, yeah.
But the reason I ask is because of the way we describe things now perhaps has changed. Again, when you look back on things, and I wonder why perhaps you don't describe it in stronger terms.
Well, right, because even I'm realizing after the book was done and everything that when I describe it, instead of talking about how inappropriate his behavior was, I'm talking about, and I was so sad to see that I wasn't the kind of person yet who could prevent that from happening, you know, instead of really it's all about his behavior, you know.
But I suppose there's still a restraint to you when you're doing
I'm
this.
still dying of blight, or maybe slightly in danger of dying of blight.
But I mean, of course you've taken work with your institute where you look at bias, you look at behavior, and yet it's interesting you can't quite bring it about yourself and about these sorts of high-profile men that you're willing to name and talk about.
Right. Yeah, I wonder if that has something to do with why I was so interested in women's empowerment and everything, is that I felt not powerful, you know, and I wanted to try to help myself as well as others.
I mean, Bill Murray's been in the news again in only the last few days. It's been alleged he had a financial settlement with a female production assistant over allegedly straddling this woman, kissing over masks on set. He said there's a difference of opinion, but shooting was stopped on the production. And we're in 2022. What's your response to that?
That he said it was a difference of opinion?
Yeah, and the whole story.
Yeah. It's bad. It's bad. It's utterly inappropriate. I mean, that anyone could think that that was a difference of opinion when she was forced to do something that she didn't want to do, you know, that's not the definition of what happened.
But I suppose hearing that story and about, I mean, it's alleged, I'll say at this point, and I know you don't know the details, I don't know the details, but all this time on, I mean, how does that make you feel when you've just described something that happened to you at the end of the 80s?
Right.
With the same guy.
Well, look, I wasn't under the impression that he would have changed necessarily.
But I suppose the world has changed. And
the world has changed.
There was a moment of change, you thought, you hoped, after Thelma and Louise.
Yes.
And you actually say in the book, nothing changed afterwards.
Right.
But you say everything in your life changed when you met Susan Sarandon, professionally certainly,
yes.
and also had a big impact, you know, personally for you. What did she have that you didn't have at that time?
An ease and self-confidence in any situation. She knew what she thought about things. She knew how to react in the moment. I mean, I was living in a world where hours or minutes or days later, I would realize what I could have said or should have done. And she just lived in the moment and was very comfortable sharing what she thought. I mean, I'm not saying that she was confrontational, but she just had an immediate ease and knew how she felt about things when they happened. And I came to realize that that I didn't even know how forget about that. I didn't say what I was thinking. I didn't even know how I felt about situations until I had time to think about it. But from minute one, I was like, wow, I never met anybody like you before.
I do love the fact that women come up to you still and say, it's our favorite movie, we've acted it out. And you probably get worried about that.
And I'm like, I don't think you did. I mean, at least, what part do you think you acted out? But I think we went on a weekend, just us girls or something like that. But, if you think about the stuff we do, people think of with Thelma and Louise as examples or maybe a little bit role models or something, but I mean, nothing we do should be emulated except being in charge of our own fate. That was the thing.
That was the driving force in it. But the rest of the details, the crime elements. And
the rest was kind of criminal.
Have you ever been on a real life road trip with Susan?
No. But I was thinking only recently that would be kind of a cool reality show.
Yeah.
Is Susan and I driving around the country.
You can't have a sequel. Everyone who asks you about that, I know you get I'm not asking that, but the idea of you two together.
Right, driving around.
You should ask her.
I should ask her. I know. Could be. I mean, we would love it.
Is she still in your life? Are you friends?
Oh yeah. We're still very good friends. Yeah, she's fantastic to be with. She would often say when we were shooting, "See how much fun it is to work with women?" And I was like, "Yes."
You talk about the roles drying up as you got older. You never thought it would happen to you. I like the way you describe it. It's awful, but you say forced retirement. I mean, I know that you're very polite, but are you angry?
Connection lost.
It made me angry and very sad, but sometimes you replace anger with sadness.
Yeah, but if you were to really let it out, Gina, in the studio, and it's not a laughing matter.
No, it wasn't. And I'd heard about this phenomenon from the very beginning that roles drop off for women once they reach 40. But I thought Meryl Streep and all the other female actors were going to fix it. And even if it's still true, that won't happen to me because I'm playing, I'm in League of Their Own and all that stuff. So it was stunning to see it also happen to me. Yeah.
But I mean, and then I talked about the Gina Davis Institute on Gender in the media, looking at female representation. I know you've set things up like the Bentonville Film Festival to look at this. What have you learned through that work that you feel perhaps is going to help change things?
Right. What I focus on with my institute is on-screen representations. And I started the whole thing because I had a daughter and started watching preschool shows with her and saw a huge gender imbalance. So I'm like, wait a minute, we're training them from minute one to have unconscious gender bias. Girls see there's not many of them there. Boys see we do all the interesting things. So that really spurred me on to want to try to change that. But most creators, most writers, most studio head people with green light power are male, and so you have to be able to in order to achieve what I wanted to achieve, you have to get the men in power also to see the problem and want to fix it.
And where do you feel we are with that? I mean, as we talk, Harvey Weinstein's back in court. We've obviously had the Me Too movement. But do you feel we're in a better place?
Well, as far as children's entertainment, I can tell you that in the 18 years since we started my institute, we have achieved parity in the lead characters in both children's television and movies made for families. So
that's good.
A huge difference from when we started. But the progress in other areas is pretty glacial as far as like female directors or editors or cinematographers, yeah.
So, I mean, your mood at the moment about that, would you say it's optimistic? Are you in a pragmatic place? Where would you say you are?
I am an impatient optimist.
Okay.
I'm always feeling like, we can get there, but it's in some spheres, it's going to take decades to reach parity. Like, we can't snap our fingers and suddenly Congress is half women. It's going to take decades.
We've still only seen a woman in the White House when it's played on television.
Exactly.
Or in the films.
Exactly.
Not quite ready yet.
Yeah.
For whatever the reason.
For whatever the reason.
Can I ask, I mean, while this forced retirement's happening, I know that's when you were having your children as well, but that wasn't the reason, as discussed. You take up archery. I mean, I have to ask about this. It's one of my favorite facts I did not know about you.
Right.
And you're really good at it.
Yeah.
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 How did that happen?
It makes sense if I explain it. So I had been very unathletic as a kid. I was so tall that I was sure that I must be uncoordinated, so I didn't want to try anything. And then I got cast in A League of Their Own to play the best baseball player anyone's ever seen. So of course I had to train and try to learn, and I was kind of good at it. And I was able to pull off looking like I really know how to play baseball. And I did learn it to some extent. And then I had to learn other skills for other movies, sword fighting and horseback riding and taekwondo and different things. And I was kind of good at all those too. So then I thought, I wonder if in real life I would be good at a sport. And what would I choose? And I happened to see archery on television during the '96 Olympics.
Right.
And I thought, wow, archery is so beautiful. It's very, dramatic, and maybe I'll be good at that. And so found a coach, took it up at 41, and then became utterly obsessed with it.
But I mean, you nearly went and represented your country?
Well,
or tell me about...
I was a semifinalist in the Olympic trials.
Which is incredible.
I know. The last thing I ever expected was to find myself in the Olympic trials in my 40s.
And what do you think it was about the sport and you?
I think I probably had a bit of a natural, hand-eye coordination or something, but I dove into it. I became utterly obsessed. I was practicing, 4 hours a day, and I don't know. I just was very determined.
Everybody want to be a consultant, and what are all these consultants doing?
Well, David, I think that we actually defy the label consultant, because sometimes consultant seems to imply that we only give advice. And when you look at what Accenture does, we're really different than the traditional version of a consultant. We're really about relevance and results, and that's what is driving our business.
What about a consulting project? In my example, I'm the CEO, I have a problem, I call you up, I say, solve my problem or give me a solution.
We don't operate as big companies permanently in crisis mode. And so when you think about, like, how long does it solve things, a lot of it starts with, the company being willing to set aggressive goals. And so what we are trying to do now is work with our clients to work differently and to work faster.
Well, I mean, also just talking about later on in your life, a late diagnosis of ADHD as well. What did that mean for you? How did that explain or unpack some of your world?
It was such a relief to find out that I didn't have a character flaw necessarily, because my entire life as a kid as well, I couldn't start things, I couldn't finish them. You know, once we started having homework that took more than one night to do, I had no ability to, you know, stretch things out, and it was very, very difficult. And I was ashamed of that, you know, that this was something wrong with me, and for my whole life, it was something I had to hide, that I can't complete things and all that. But as soon as I found I was diagnosed with ADD, I was like, oh my God, that explains everything. It was such an awakening. And so, okay, so in other words, I can start feeling like this is not my fault. Doesn't mean I'm a bad person. You know what I mean?
This is who you are.
It was very.
And did you take anything for it, or did it change your approach?
I didn't end up taking any medication for it, but it did change my approach. It made me realize that I needed coping skills that would help deal with that. So, for example, if I felt like I wasn't going to practice archery on a certain day, which I wanted to, but am I going to make myself get in the car? I would make an appointment for a brief time with my coach in the morning. And then once I'm there, I could stay all day and practice. But, you know, like little tricks like that.
Would you like to do a lot more acting again, though? Do you think? Oh,
yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. That's my thing. Acting is my thing. That's what I want to do, you know.
Yeah, well, I mean, at the same time, you've obviously kept yourself very busy, but I was thinking back to, we had Gloria Allred on the program, the feminist lawyer, and she was talking about women getting more radical as they get older. Do you feel that has happened to you?
Well, so I worked with Polly Bergen once, who was a famous actress. When I worked with her, she was 80, but she had been quite famous, and I couldn't believe how salty she was on set. She was swearing here, there, right, you know. And I was like, wow, Polly, you really, yeah, you're kind of like a sailor. And she said, when you get to be my age, you just don't give a shit anymore. And I was like, okay, then I'm going to be like you when I get to be your age.
This is what I'm heading for.
Yeah.
Are there any dream roles for you that you think about?
There's one real-life character that I would like to play, who is Eleanor Roosevelt. And the great thing about that is she was famous her whole life. So I'm not going to age out of being able to play her.
No.
You know? And she was very tall like me. I think I could look very much like her.
Yeah, well, there's a great quote that's always attributed to her about a woman being like a tea bag. You don't know how strong she is till you put her in hot water.
I love that.
I don't know if it is definitely her, but I got given it on a pincushion.
Oh, I love that. That's a great quote.
So, okay, we've sorted it. Eleanor Roosevelt, and you're going to do a reality TV show with Susan.
Sure, yeah.
Well, it's lovely to talk to you and hear some of your memories that you've shared in the book, but also where you think we're at the moment. Gina Davis, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
And thank you so much for being with us. And until we meet again, take care and goodbye.
Mars Technology, the only daily business show dedicated to tech, right in the middle of the trading action. 12 p.m. on the East Coast, 9 a.m. in the West. Only on Bloomberg Television, your global business authority. Bloomberg UK, your source for news and analysis covering the biggest challenges facing the UK government, economy, financial services, and markets.
Tax cuts should not be the priority. It's about a credible plan for growth over the next 2-3 years.
In this post-Brexit world, how do you see actually servicing your clients?
It was disruptive, and it's going to have implications to how capital raising works.
Now we're having the perfect storm in the UK.
Watch Francine Lacqua Thursdays at 9:30 a.m. only on Bloomberg, your global business authority.
What do you like most about your job?
I think the people. I mean, ultimately, we're a people business. A lot of what my job is as CEO of the company is to give those people sort of motivation, to tell them where we're going, to encourage them to come up and do their best work, to encourage them to collaborate. Sometimes you sort of think you're almost a psychologist, as you are a business leader, I think, sometimes.
And so what's your best piece of advice?
I love pitches. I love being sort of leading from the front, if you like, and spending times with teams. I love to see the work that we're doing. When we pitch for a piece of new business, often when we come together. So I guess I try and put myself in the seat of the client. What's the client going to think when they see this work? Are they going to be excited? Is it going to turn their brand around? How's it going to resonate with their consumers? So as much as possible, I think probably I try and play that role.
Welcome to Bloomberg New Economy Gateway Europe. The world reglobalizes. I'm Eric Schatzker. Over the next half hour, I'll share with you highlights from the inaugural Bloomberg New Economy Gateway Europe, which we held just outside Dublin, Ireland. Our program was built around the theme of reglobalization, and we looked through that lens at issues of importance and urgency to Europe, including trade, energy, finance, and transportation. We drew on insights from leaders in politics, business, and regulation to help build clarity and understanding around the ongoing war in Ukraine, the persistence of high inflation, and the potential fallout from legislation such as the U.S. Inflation Reduction Act. But let's begin with the Taoiseach of Ireland, Leo Varadkar. He spoke with Bloomberg's Stephanie Flanders.
We've modernised and reformed our corporate tax laws quite a lot in Ireland over recent years because we want to stay inside the international framework. We're not a tax haven. We don't want to be perceived as a tax haven. So we've got rid of things like stateless corporations. We've got rid of things like the double Irish. We closed a lot of loopholes that existed. We're now increasing our rates. And every time we seem to do it, more money comes in, whereas people expect less money to come in. But someday that will happen.
If you start boasting about that at international meetings, I think everyone's going to start hating you. But we'll, so there's been a lot of conversation this week about the US and China, how Europe is able to position itself. Pascal Donahue talked about it last night, the importance of engagement with China. We have seen, not just in the remarks actually, but in the response to President Macron's remarks about China, that these sort of differences in tone and approach among different European countries towards China can really unnerve people. How important is it, do you think, for the Europeans to have a united sort of view on their strategic approach to China?
I do think President von der Leyen puts it very well in saying that our objective should be not decoupling, but de-risking. So Chinese investment is welcome in Ireland. Trade with China is very important. We don't want to enter into any sort of political conflict with China. They're a competitor, they're also a partner, but we do need to bear in mind that there are potential risks, and that's around certain raw materials. We don't want to be overly dependent on any third country for raw materials that are essential to us, certain products, and also certain security issues.
It's another area, though, where you may end up having kind of unexpected consequences from the fact that the European Union is not a unitary state. You have individual countries reassessing their national security and potentially economic relationships as a result of that. And that's not something that's technically in the purview of Brussels. So do you think there's going to have to be some adaptation around that?
Look, it is difficult to do. We have a common foreign and security policy, but it's done by consensus in reality, not by majority vote or by QMV, and I don't see that changing anytime soon. But when faced with challenges, Europe has come together, I think, better than people thought it would. Has really come together over Ukraine, has really come together when we had to work together on the pandemic, particularly when it came to procuring vaccines and so on. Really worked together when it came to Brexit. People were surprised at the level of solidarity among 27 member states. So I think we can do the same on China.
Actually, Europe is much more unified, and it's also becoming a security bloc, which I think is very interesting. And so from my perspective, I am very optimistic about the future for Europe. And it will, financial services is changing, business dynamics are changing, but there are opportunities around every corner.
The European Union has stuck together. It's stuck together on Brexit, to the benefit of Ireland in particular. It's stuck together on the pandemic. And it also has stuck together on Ukraine. If you look at the progressive rounds of sanctions, if you look at the fact that some important kind of crossing points have been forwarded. For example, the EU is now agreeing to supply weaponry and ammunition to Ukraine, as something that would been unthinkable a few years ago.
So I think the challenge for the European Commission is more effective regulation. Refocus your efforts, and the Commission needs to refocus its efforts on improving the single market and making Europe, the lives of its citizenry in Europe better, and that's ultimately the way to prevent further departures like Brexit.
Now, there's multiple ways to ensure supply chain resilience. It could be multi-sourcing, which is one of the things that we deploy, the industry does. So multi-sourcing for the same medicine, for example, you can source part of it from China, you can source part of it from Europe and US, for example. We've got the largest part of our manufacturing footprint in Europe, per se, and here in Ireland, in terms of a specific country. So I think it's really thinking about that supply chain resilience around multi-sourcing, being able to co-locate capabilities in more than one country, if you will. Not so much around localizing the entire supply chain in China or in the West or whatever the case may be, but continue to leverage that globalness, capabilities, and scale.
I do think what we are going to find is that outside of a very few industries and sectors, governments are not going to be willing to subsidize indefinitely production that brings it home or brings it to allies. And so the benefits of international supply chains that we've seen over 40 years, from economies of scale, from specialization, from innovation and the like, those aren't going to go away. And so if you don't have an international supply chain, you will be beat out by competitors who do.
The other thing I would say on this is that there's a lot of talk about the Brussels effect, about the fact that, because we're a big market, we can basically just export our regulatory model when it comes to the green transition, for example, or other areas. I think we are very conscious in the EU that we have to continue to engage in international regulatory cooperation. That is the one way that it will enable us to avoid trade and investment tensions further down the road.
With eyes wide open, I support a resetting of the mission and mandate of the WTO. In doing so, I am deeply conscious of the many current challenges to world trade, the complexity of finding a collective way forward. But this is a journey we must take. The challenges, the problems, are the calls for help from the world and are the learning opportunities of our time. The member countries of the WTO have always shown great resilience in seeking to find a way forward. Enabling this new area of world trade will require cathedral thinking, cathedral ideas. The WTO can be a cathedral organization. It can be enabled by its member countries to advance sustainable world trade to the lasting benefit of future generations. When relationships veer off course, you must always strive to find a new pathway so that you can create the new mutually beneficial alliances. Now we must dig deep. Now we must find the courage to travel the hard road. At the core of future progress will be empathy, the openness to understand the perspectives of others, the willingness to build the relationships of the future. We must find the new ways to embrace that which unites us.
Coming up, more from Ireland, including Philip Hildebrand, the Vice Chairman of BlackRock. This is Bloomberg.
What do you like most about your job?
I think the people. I mean, ultimately, we're a people business. A lot of what my job is as CEO of the company is to give those people sort of motivation to tell them where we're going, to encourage them to come up and do their best work, to encourage them to collaborate. Sometimes you sort of think you're almost a psychologist, you know, as you are a business leader, I think, sometimes.
And so what's your best piece of advice?
I love pitches. I love being sort of leading from the front, if you like, and spending times with teams. I love to see the work that we're doing. When we pitch for a piece of new business, often when we come together. So I guess I try and put myself in the seat of the client. And what's the client going to think when they see this work? Are they going to be excited? Is it going to turn their brand around? How's it going to resonate with their consumers? So as much as possible, I think probably I try and play that role.
Welcome back to Bloomberg New Economy Gateway Europe, the world reglobalizes. On day 2 of our event here in Ireland, Bloomberg's Francine Lacqua spoke with BlackRock Vice Chairman Philip Hildebrand. The former head of the Swiss National Bank had a lot to say about the recent volatility in finance, which of course reminded us all of the 2008 crisis. Take a look.
You were instrumental in 08-09 in putting together the government response at the SNB, also to get UBS through turbulent time. What was March like, seeing Credit Suisse just disappear?
Well, it brought back a lot of bad memories, personally, obviously, although it's quite a different story. You know, back in 2008, it was really kind of a surgical strike. There was a cancer in the balance sheet, which was well-defined. Turned out to be 40 billion of bad assets. And we came in with the help of the government as the central bank and basically took it out. So it was a kind of, think of a cancer surgery, you go in, it works, successful, and it's over. This was much more complicated in that it was a kind of a slow burning, I would say, probably the best way to describe it would be a loss of confidence in the business model and probably also in management. From what I know, and obviously only from outside, in 2008 we had the benefit of having been added in terms of preparatory work much longer. This was a really hard one to tackle because it came quickly at the end. It accelerated very, very quickly within 1 week. There was enormous pressure given where the global system was to come to a solution essentially over the weekend. So I think given all that and given where the authorities were at that point, it seems to me that the government in particular has done a very good job, not just for Switzerland itself, but also for the global financial system. And particularly, I think, a full resolution, you know, at that point, given where the system was, at that point would have been extremely delicate. So I think the government handled this as well as you could have. The question now will be, how does this settle? And how does UBS position itself going forward, given quite intense political discussions in Switzerland around competition, around size, and many other issues. So, you know, this story is not over, but the emphasis has now shifted to what UBS is going to do with it, as opposed to what the government did. And I think the government handled it under very difficult circumstances very well.
How will UBS do it?
I don't know. You know, I think, as always in life, particularly when you face complex things, it's all about execution. You can talk about difficulties all day long, but in the end, you have to execute. This will be a big execution story. I think it's a culture story. The chairman of UBS, rightly in my mind, has indicated that these were two very different cultures, which makes any merger is difficult or any acquisition is difficult. When you have two different cultures, it makes it more difficult. So it's mostly going to be about execution. And then I would say wisdom in terms of how they handle which is admittedly a national discussion. It's not really an international problem, but a very intense national, very emotional national discussion around this very large bank, this single very large bank that's now in the country, in a country that has always historically had several large banks. That's a big change for the population, for politics, and we'll see how UBS handles this.
There's 130 countries in the world that are looking at pulling together a central bank digital currency. The cash that you're holding in your wallet today, they want to tokenize. And they're going to issue it to you through the central bank. And the ECB, specifically in Europe, wants to do this direct to consumer. There'll be maybe intermediaries that kind of facilitate those transactions, but they want to cap how much you can hold. They will have access to the information around where you were and what you did and what you spent your money on. They can tell you what you can spend your money on. You can buy that, but you can't buy that. So ultimately, the financial system is moving toward tokenization, whether we like it or not. And so I started by saying we've got optionality, we've got choices. And so the more choices, the better, that allow us to transact how we want to transact. But the idea that everyone in this room isn't going to have access to, potentially forced to use a digital wallet at some point, would you rather use an asset that provides some level of privacy and control, or do you want to use an asset that's given to you by the government that, the country that you live in and told how you can spend your money?
Silicon Valley Bank failed on a Thursday night. Within a couple of days, Credit Suisse had been forced into a shotgun marriage with UBS. How long after that, and of course Signature Bank also failed that Sunday night back in New York, how long did it take before you felt like everything's going to be okay?
Well, I think there is a general question that any times you dent trust and confidence into the system, then you worry. Because at the end of the day, banks are built on the trust and confidence. So that for me was the key issue. Is the broader market not understanding exactly what triggered the situation going to say we have another 2008 and therefore all the banks have the same issues? And the market reaction was exactly in that direction. But when you look at the issues that triggered that, at least for example in the US, liquidity, interest rate, mismatches, and we just could not be doing that even if we wanted to, and we do not want in Europe. So it does not apply. What applies is a read across that affects confidence. So let's say that we were convinced that we were in a solid position quite quickly. What we were worried about is the contagion by the lack of trust, of confidence. I think that the ECB just keeping its direction with rate increases.
Not blinking.
Not blinking, authorizing us to distribute 3.35 billion of share buyback to our shareholders. That's about 10% of our market cap, kind of underscored with facts that the situations are very different.
I grew up at a time that was in 2008, right, when the U.S. was actually entering a recession, right? So we had a very strong focus at the time on fundamentals in businesses, meaning companies that were either profitable or had a path to showing profitability. What I saw in the last decade, maybe in the last 5 years particularly, was sort of an abandonment of that focus as companies were chasing sort of hyper growth for extended periods of time. What I think the collapse of SVB means is a lot of investors are going back to those fundamentals and looking probably with higher scrutiny today than they were over the last few years for businesses that actually have demonstrable proof of a profitable revenue plan and profitable growth.
Coming up, more from the Bloomberg New Economy Gateway Europe, including Kurt Sievers, the CEO of NXP Semiconductor, on the push for European leadership in technology.
Welcome to the world of decentralized finance.
You can see the massive gains for the OG crypto coin.
The breakout we have all perhaps long awaited, finally realized. We'll see if it sticks.
Bloomberg's covering all things crypto, the people.
There's no question this industry is composed of some bad actors and some good actors.
The transactions.
Volumes have surpassed $24 billion per day.
And the technology.
Stop talking about the technology, start demonstrating the utility.
Bloomberg Crypto, Tuesdays. Today's CFOs are reshaping the C-suite, positioning companies to meet the next generation of challenges, breaking out of traditional roles.
One of the most important things is looking around the corner.
Look for Chief Future Officer on Bloomberg.
From New York City.
From London and Sydney.
From Washington.
In Tokyo.
9 a.m. in Beijing and Shanghai.
Good morning, everyone.
Have a great evening. Here's what I'm watching.
You do not want to miss this
Is
story.
there the kind of upside?
Welcome back to Ireland and Bloomberg New Economy Gateway Europe, the world reglobalizes. I'm Eric Schatzker. The U.S. Congress has been busy passing bills to subsidize the development of advanced chip production and clean energy technology. Europe was caught off guard by the size and terms of these programs. But Kurt Sievers, the CEO of NXP Semiconductor, told me Europe and the United States can and perhaps should work together.
The West is trying to starve China of advanced chip technology, and meantime, you have Europe with the CHIPS Act, the European CHIPS Act, and the United States with its own CHIPS Act competing with each other for chip-making capacity by offering tens of billions of dollars each in subsidies for fab construction. Is this a turning point?
That's a big question. Let me try and parse it, Eric. So first of all, there is no digital without chips. And I emphasize that because everybody speaks about the digitalization of the world. And I would even go a step further. There is no Green Deal without chips. So yes, it's a bit like the new oil for the world. And given some of these geopolitical tensions, especially between the US and China, it's become a necessity, I believe, to be more resilient against these geopolitical tensions. And while finding it out the hard way through the past 2 years during the pandemic, and what I mean with the hard way is that we've all seen how key industries in Europe and the US, especially in the industrial, medical, and automotive sectors, have suffered from a shortage of semiconductors, it became painfully aware how much we all depend on semiconductors. I mean, I've been in this industry for 30 years now, and 27 years of that period, I could never talk with my friends about what I'm doing because nobody knew what chips are. Now everybody does, and again, from a painful way. Now, coming back to the CHIPS Act, I think it is late, but it is good, very good and very needed to do this. But there is a few attention points, and you mentioned one of them. The one you mentioned is, I think it would be fantastic if there was a lot of synchronization between the US CHIPS Act and the European CHIPS Act in terms of what to support, such that it will be complementary. I see this as one Western world, which should be combining the funds almost in order to create the best together. I mean, the US has 50+ billion. We just signed yesterday the 43 billion euros in Europe. Mind you that in the end, it is big money from a government perspective. It is little money from an industry perspective, which means we have to spend it in a very dedicated and very well thought through way in order to get the best out of it. I'm not saying it doesn't happen. So I think you were overly critical in your question. I would say we have to make sure and pay attention that it does happen more and more going forward.
We're using advanced AI systems to uncover new solutions to problems that we don't fully understand or that we think may never be achievable. We've worked to and use AI to help control the plasma of nuclear fusion reactors, which is an important step in the safety of making this a viable solution. So I think there's a lot of things that we're seeing, and generative AI in my mind is really just the first rung on a very long ladder. I think it's exciting to think about the potential. And again, the reason I joined DeepMind was thinking about what future I want to hand my children and the generations that follow. And I believe AI can help us create a better society.
If you want society to embrace technology and to trust technology, you need to have that social contract with society. And if it's necessary to put more guardrails to put certain mechanisms and principles in place, and this is what we want to do in the AI Act. You need some sort of clear principles and mechanisms, not just to regulate the next big thing that is coming, but that will be foundational for the technology under which whatever you want to create that has to do something with AI, you need to abide by those basic principles and mechanisms.
Last year, we did a study on aviation, and we also looked at how we can keep the aviation sector below 2 degrees. And Willie mentioned a lot of the same findings that we had. It's going to be a lot about sustainable aviation fuel. It's going to be about improved efficiencies, and it's going to be about zero emission planes, which I think we're going to hear a little bit more about shortly. And the exciting part for us is that we have identified a pathway that is feasible. Now we are going to need government regulations, and I think it's kind of interesting. You look at what's taking place in Europe and you look at what's taking place in the US, and they're kind of going on 2 different pathways. Let's start with the US. We've heard a lot about the Inflation Reduction Act. The Inflation Reduction Act is really about incentives and subsidies to bring the sustainable aviation fuel using government money, and that's going to probably get us displacing about 10% of our aviation fuel by about 2030, something along those lines.
But from Rolls-Royce's perspective, we've got a number of really exciting technology projects. We broke the world speed record last year with an all-electric plane. Single-seater, but it's the world's most powerful battery ever taken to the sky. So really proving the potential of some of that technology. We are working on some hydrogen projects as well, which I won't go into in too much detail, but again, we've tested a gaseous hydrogen engine actually. Again, operators as expected, no real changes needed, which is pretty key in an industry that's so heavily regulated and relies so much on certification. No changes, sometimes a really, really good thing.
Here is where data is very important. Eurocontrol did an excellent study. If you banned all flights in Europe, every single one below 500 kilometers, you would reduce the number of flights by 24%, but the impact on CO2 is only 3.8%. So I think when we're making these decisions, we need to understand, what is the impact of the decision going to be? And we need to be honest with people. If you banned all short-haul flying in Europe, you save 3.8%. If you introduce the single European sky in Europe, which is technically possible today, you would reduce emissions by 10%. So there are steps that we can take, and we need every single possible contribution to get to net zero in 2050. But I'm very clear that from an industry point of view, we can do it, and you will be able to continue to fly between now and 2050. And in 2050, this industry will be at net zero.
That's all from Bloomberg New Economy Gateway Europe, the world reglobalizes. You'll find all our panels and interviews at Bloomberg.com and on the terminal. I'm Eric Schatzker. This is Bloomberg.
Business Week Radio, live weekday afternoons at 3 p.m. Eastern.
We got a little bit of talking.
Come on, are you guys ready?
Harnessing the power of Bloomberg Business Week, Carol Masser and Tim Stanovic bring you the latest news from the worlds of business, technology, politics, and more.
How does the Fed play into this and what the Fed does potentially?
This is so exhausting and this is so all-encompassing.
Listen on Bloomberg Radio and streaming on YouTube and Bloomberg Originals. This June, in honor of Pride Month and Juneteenth, Bloomberg brings you a special equality series every Thursday in June at 1 p.m. Eastern. Bloomberg Equality, celebrating inclusion this Pride Month.
there's much oil to be found in the lower 48 at this point, or even in, let's say, Alaska as well, where mostly we know where all the oil is, and there's no more big Permian Basin kind of deposits anywhere.
People have said that over time, and then we've always been surprised. And so the U.S. has been explored more than any other place in the world. I think the industry has a good idea, but technology allows you sometimes to recover things that you haven't been able to before. That's the story of shale. The other one that continues to be a positive story is deepwater Gulf of Mexico, where we'll go out and drill in a mile or more of water depth and then go down several more miles and find large fields. And the Gulf of Mexico is still relatively underexplored compared to the onshore. So I think there's still room for more discoveries.
Enjoy the excitement of a night of music at Boston Symphony Hall with BSO Now. Watch brand new Boston Symphony Orchestra performances, behind-the-scenes storytelling, and memorable archival concerts, all from the comfort of home. Use our free 24-hour trial and see why the Boston Globe calls it musically rewarding, and the Berkshire Edge says the orchestra has never played better. Visit bso.org/now, where the music plays on. BSO season sponsored by Bank of America.
This is the Steve Young you most likely remember. He was a defining athlete of his generation, building a career out of defying expectations. From being 8th on the BYU depth chart to a record USFL contract, to sitting behind the great Joe Montana for years, Young ultimately became a Hall of Fame Super Bowl winning quarterback, known for his pinpoint passing accuracy and a penchant for dynamic runs.
Trouble, he's going to be sacked. No, gets away. He runs, gets away again to the 35, to the 20, the 15, the 10. He dives. Touchdown, 49ers.
I played 18 seasons. There's a few that have played more. Tom Brady's now 23, but I got as many as maybe anyone who ever played. And I still did have half of my life that I wanted to be productive. And what could you do with another half of a life?
Turns out, a lot. Steve Young didn't just make a name and a fortune from his NFL days. Armed with a law degree earned while he was still a player and a front row seat to the tech revolution in Silicon Valley, he's quietly built an investment firm that's done more than $50 billion in deals over the past 2 decades.
I mean, look, my previous life, it was amazing. You know, throwing Jerry Rice a touchdown or Brent Jones in front of 80,000 people and winning games, like there's nothing like it. It's not 80,000 people watching it, but it feels familiar. And I think that's why there is magic in private equity.
This is the Steve Young many haven't seen, the player turned investor. I recently got to spend a few days trying to keep up with Young, from his offices in Silicon Valley to a Scottsdale golf club and lots of places in between. What started as a straightforward story about an athlete's successful transition to business turned out to be something much more. A tale of a relentless guy intent on finally marrying his playing and investing careers, with an eye toward radically changing both deal-making and athletes' lives in the process.
Hi.
This is a tough decision, but I know that I've made the right one, and I really feel it in my heart, and I can't deny it. And so I retire from the great game of football today.
Lots of players have managed to move from the locker room to the boardroom, taking largely titular roles as advisors and rainmakers to companies or investment firms. Few can say they've committed as much as Steve Young, studying investment memos the same way he studied the Niners playbook.
All right, dental, Pat, on your horse.
Young's firm, HGGC, sits in one of the most fascinating corners of Wall Street, private equity. Once upon a time, that industry was relatively hidden. Now it's one of the most influential engines of the global economy.
It feels like anecdotally, I'm hearing more like, oh, private equity consolidated this practice of medical, and they ruined it.
Talking about acquiring dental practices may not be as captivating as throwing game-winning touchdowns, but it's a fast-growing, very lucrative business. Collectively, private equity firms control more than $6 trillion in assets, according to McKinsey. The founders of the biggest firms, guys like Henry Kravis and Steve Schwartzman, they are billionaires many times over. So let's talk for a minute about the basics of private equity. Think of it like buying and selling houses. Basically, PE firms use a mix of cash from investors and money borrowed from banks to buy companies, make them more profitable, and sell them down the line. And just like with houses, some people own them for a few years, take really good care of them, and sell them for a nice profit. Others, they're more like flippers who look to do the minimum to make a quick buck. Buyout firms have been rightly criticized over the years for shuttering plants and cutting jobs in pursuit of those massive profits, especially in recent years when it comes to medical practices owned by private equity firms. Some practitioners have complained that it forces them to choose between profits and patients. So as they've grown in stature, so too has the scrutiny and the sense of responsibility beyond the bottom line. Young and his partners, they're more than cognizant of that historical reputation, and they're aiming to be more nurturing than swashbuckling. They're operating at a smaller scale than the big firms in the so-called middle market, eyeing companies worth $50 million to $500 million. That's still a pretty big business. HGGC, they've raised 4 funds totaling almost $7 billion. For Steve Young, it's unquestionably one of the most successful second acts of any former athlete. And while Steve may live in the same neighborhood in Silicon Valley as Mark Zuckerberg, you might not know it from his ride.
Vans are the best cars on the road. If you don't have a van and you have kids, and you don't have a van, you're an idiot.
Yeah.
I mean, how do you not go 14 cup holders and 6 outlets? I can run everything right here. It's like a rocket ship. 87 was when I lived here. I moved here for the first time. Silicon Valley was kind of up to full speed in 10 years, so by 1997. So in the last 20 years or so, 25 years even, it's changed in that the biggest companies in the world that weren't here 20 years ago are now here. Right. But what hasn't changed is Stanford's down the street. Silicon Valley's always been kind of an entrepreneurial place.
Back when Steve was playing in the early 90s, the technology boom was really just cranking up, just a few miles from where the 49ers played at Candlestick Park.
We're watching Silicon Valley just explode around us in Santa Clara. 3Com, Cisco, name any business, any big business. And I don't know who had the first idea. I can't give it to anybody because I don't know who said it. It was like, let's bring them in the locker room. And we'll tell them, look, we'll trade some access to the locker room because that's what we have. Right. Because everyone wanted that, right? The 49ers at that time, it'd be like right now, name it, like the Patriots or the Warriors, the Rams, or anyone else. And so we had 10, 15 different companies, $10,000, $15,000 each. We'd split it all up, and that would just started to come pretty regularly.
Those investments and relationships were critical for Steve's own transition into the world of investing. But access to money and deals while playing isn't a guarantee of financial success.
Into private equity was a windy road. When you're playing, you're one of the best in the world, or best athletes in the world, but you don't have financial literacy. Right. But you have all this money. Yeah. And so there's a big, huge chasm in between your financial literacy and the money that's in the bank. We've watched those stories and the tragic stories.
Yeah. It was a painful moment because when you have somebody coming and trying to take your Rose Bowl rings, your trophies, your cars, your house.
Redskins running back Clinton Portis earning more than $40 million on the gridiron, but life after football led to bankruptcy and almost drove him to murder.
Around 15% of NFL players file for bankruptcy within 25 years of retirement. And while there are extreme examples of failure and success, every player has the same transition.
So Fabien, talk to me a little bit about the ocean. It covers 70% of the planet. It gives us food, it gives us jobs, it gives us, of course, oxygen. We're taking too many fish out, we're polluting it, we're making it warmer, and only 3% of it is protected. What frustrates you the most about this?
The basic frustration is our ignorance about how integral ocean is to not only our well-being, but to our existence. And for far too long, we've been using the ocean as an endless resource in a garbage can. Imagine our planet is a three-dimensional system. The ocean represents 99% of our world's living space, about 3.4 billion cubic kilometers of volume, within which the vast majority of biodiversity lives and thrives. And that's what we're beholden to. That is what makes us possible as a species.
Bloomberg has enhanced search on the terminal to deliver what you need when you need it. Now, you can simply type phrases in everyday English in the command line. Compare financials. Find people. Analyze markets. You can enter phrases or ask questions. What do you want to know today? Ask a question or visit SearchGo to find answers now. Access the financial world on demand. Hear from leading economists, policymakers, and industry experts via live and on-demand webinars, only from Bloomberg. Start exploring to see what's moving the markets. Visit Bloomberg.com/webinars.
Me, it started when I first got here in '93, because I wasn't drafted, so being, kind of coming in, it was like every day could be my last day.
While Junior Bryant played for 10 seasons in the NFL, his transition was sudden. While making a tackle, Junior went airborne, landing with his full weight on his head.
Most careers kind of end like mine, unfortunately. That's just the nature of the game. And even though I was doing all that work from the very first day, I still wasn't ready. I kind of really wandered for a few years. I had ideas of things I wanted to do, but I just didn't take the step just to kind of move forward.
I had the same paralysis. Like, what exactly am I going to do? What am I even qualified to do?
Junior would eventually end up working at HGGC with Steve, as well as serve on the board for his foundation, Forever Young. Through his foundation, Forever Young, Steve is looking to bridge that gap between athletes having a lot of money and, as he describes, financial literacy. He hopes to create a repository of player transition stories. It's a resource for players by players to give unbiased advice on what comes after sports, an effort to pay forward his success off the field and help others transition from the field to executive suites, like the one his firm has at Levi's Stadium.
All right, so this is the suite. This is the firm suite.
The suite. Playing the game and what we all been through, players don't realize how useful that can be if you paid attention. They don't realize the resource that they can be. As Junior said, we're all kind of frozen. And I want them to know, by definition of what you've been through, you have something to add to the conversation. I began preparing for my future beyond football probably earlier than I wanted to, because my dad kept pecking at me about the rest of my life. What are you going to do? What's your plan? What's your plan? What's your plan? And I was like, my plan is to play football. He's like, that's not a plan.
That motivation pushed Steve to go back to school at the same time he was playing, running from Super Bowls to law school for 6 years. In 1994, the same year he was league MVP, he also graduated with a law degree from Brigham Young.
Without the law degree, I wouldn't have been able to get the opportunity to get into direct investing. Now, did I have the MBA that everyone had out of Harvard? Did I do the 4 years of consulting or banking? No. But I think I was given the opportunity because I had that in my pocket. I wouldn't have gone to law school if my dad had not had driven it into my head that you better have a plan.
As his professional career wound down, he would use those relationships forged in the locker room to find ways into the world of business. He sat on the board of Power Bar after becoming a huge fan of the product as a player. He used to just down them on the sidelines. Like Niners teammates Ronnie Lott and Harris Barton, Young had become more invested in investing. He initially formed Northgate Capital with some ex-teammates and then went on to Sorensen Capital, where he first worked with his future partner, Rich Lawson.
I actually started my career at Morgan Stanley prior to business school in the mergers and acquisitions department, and slept under a desk in New York and in Tokyo, Japan for Morgan Stanley. We started as direct investors at a firm called Sorensen Capital, and that was probably 20 years ago.
The two eventually decided to create their own firm alongside two high-caliber private equity mentors, Bob Gay and John Huntsman Sr. What looked like a winning partnership among the four of them, initially called Huntsman Gay Global Capital, didn't last. Gay opted to take a job with the Mormon Church, and Huntsman, who planned to join after his company was bought, never joined when that deal to sell his company fell through. So no Huntsman, no Gay, but Young and Lawson opted to press ahead as HGGC.
So this is the inner sanctum. I like it.
We did not clean it up for you, Tom. I apologize. This is a working day.
It's great. And I love the helmet.
The firm's offices are filled with sports memorabilia, much of which is used for prizes and charity work that Steve and the firm participate in year-round. But Steve is quick to point out that it took a while for him to embrace being surrounded by his past.
When I retired from football, Roger Staubach was my hero, and we developed a relationship, and I asked him, Roger, you're one of the greatest transition guys in the history of the NFL to go do something else. Yeah. Give me some tips. And his number one tip was run. And I go, well, run? What do you mean run? He goes, just get it, run away. Like, yeah. But he said, because it'll never leave you. You'll always have football and the history in the NFL and all the things that happen, but you need to run.
You also, and I don't think this is a stretch, had some hesitation about being ex-football player investor. You wanted to be an investor. Is that fair?
That's very fair, and I think the more famous you are as a player, the more accomplished you are, the more I thought the difficulty would to actually have people take you seriously. And I wanted my fame to be a tool. I didn't want it to be a weapon. And it's so easy to weaponize, right? You can bring in and just slay the room, and that's not the way I wanted to do it. But certainly when I started, I held myself back in some ways.
So integral to that transition, as it were, in that evolution, is Rich Lawson, your partner. And we actually, I talked to him last week about this very topic. So I want to show you something.
All right,
his take on it.
Bring some drama.
We have a very long hallway leading to our shared office that I can't seem to get my own wall. And every week I would put up his jerseys from his various different accolades, the USFL or the 49ers or BYU. And it would be strange because one day they'd be there and then I would come back from a trip and they'd all be gone. So I think for years he wanted to minimize what his past was as opposed to embrace it. It's been really critical to our business. It's given us a bit of a defining characteristic in addition to being good investors, because no matter how successful you are in other venues, if you're not delivering great returns for your investors, it doesn't matter.
That's great. All true, every bit of it. I'll call it immaturity on my part, but it was born out of this desire to try to make sure that what I was doing, I wanted people to know I was serious about.
And that meant grinding it out on deals, doing the work to find, buy, and fix companies. HGGC has completed more than 500 portfolio investments, transactions with an enterprise value of nearly $50 billion. Young & Lawson's playbook, it's one of cultivating relationships over long periods to consummate deals. As time went on, the sports memorabilia and Wall Street deal toys, those lucite mementos of companies bought, sold, or taken public, began to share space.
You can see the 49er room is the main conference room. Okay, we get it. Someone joked, I said, we promise to put you over, Joe. It's the only place I ever get.
It's funny, I was sneaking around your office earlier, and I saw that picture of you in Montana, very intimate portrait.
We all agree that it was awkward.
Yeah.
It never wasn't awkward. In fact, AT&T did a commercial on it recently,
Yeah, exactly.
but it was always profitable.
Yeah.
And I think that was that creative tension that it had part of it. And I'll always honor my time with Joe. I hated watching, but I loved watching Joe.
Do you think about that in the context of like business and CEOs and succession? Like, you've got to, right?
So much of this business is classic relationship.
We're investing in a lot of different capabilities and features that makes the in-store shopping experience that much easier, that much more compelling, whether it's price check, browsing inventory in this store, so that we can really make that experience as convenient and as simple as possible.
Convenient, simple, that's sort of what people have needed in the age of COVID. Is that here to stay, or do we go back when finally we all hope that the pandemic will be behind us in some way? Do our changing shopping habits go back again?
What's really interesting about retail in my 20-plus experience is that convenience never reverts itself. Now, the form of convenience has shifted, whereas, say, in 2000 to 2010, a lot of convenience was driven by more stores nearby. Now it's stores in addition to digital. Yeah. There's nothing closer than the phone in your hand.
A few days later, I joined Steve at his charity golf tournament at True North, just outside of Scottsdale, Arizona. The proceeds of that day go to his philanthropic organization, Forever Young. For nearly 3 decades, that's served children facing significant physical, emotional, and financial challenges.
I love golf. I love thinking about it. I just don't play it very often. But I believe that if you love golf and you don't play very often, you can get better kind of in your backyard. That's my theory. And it has proven untrue.
Steve's ability on the course may not be etched into any record books, but following him around, it's clear that it's not for lack of trying.
Oh, well. All right. Off we go.
We were constantly hustling behind him as he caught up with executives in the portfolio companies and reminisced with former and current players.
He's a day trader. He caught himself, self-made day trader. Yeah. And so he's on the bus after a game in New England, and he's day trading on the bus, and Bill Belichick sees him and cuts him on the spot. The season that they went to the Super Bowl, day trading got him cut. You know, in many ways, it's a convention, right, of the people that I don't see maybe once a year. We're half the field or more from our own portfolio and our own firm. And so it's kind of all come together. My firm, our charity, our fundraising efforts, and then the friends that are around. My dad and my brother, it all happens right there as a confluence of all these parts of my life that have found its common center.
You should meet Andy. This is Andy in the black hat here. He was CEO of me.
It may sound trite, but these personal relationships and conversations that Steve has with folks on the golf course, it's actually similar to his and the firm's approach to private equity. For them, the art is in the relationships built across the negotiating table and even in the days, months, decades leading up to being at that table, rather than Excel-based financial models ground out by young analysts in Manhattan skyscrapers more typically associated with buyout firms.
If you could leave the hubris behind that says, I love that business, but it would be so much better if I ran it, right? To me, the more profitable way to do it, not just in returns, but in kind of legacy, in abundance, is to approach it kind of looking at the person across the table as your strategic partner.
Help me understand how you fit into the family. One of HGGC's best partnerships was with Brian Adams, the founder and CEO of an insurance technology company called Integrity.
So we had an advisor that linked us up in the beginning. And, you know, the first thing, everybody thinks of Steve as a football player. And you're intimidated by this idea of this Hall of Fame quarterback. But what you really see quickly is how humble Steve is, how normal he is.
Integrity was part of an auction in 2016, one where 19 others were bidding. And while HGGC didn't put up the highest monetary offer, it was the relationship that Steve had struck up with Brian that helped them win the deal.
Steve and I got to know each other and got to become friends. And we started really kind of aligning our values. For us, it was a lot of this kind of value alignment. It was like, we've got to figure out how to become partners. And it's been an incredible ride for us.
After HGGC took a minority stake in Integrity, Steve was appointed chairman of the board. In 6 years, the company grew from a few hundred employees to more than 5,000. That's in large part due to acquiring 125 companies through M&A. Most recently, Integrity got a new round of funding, $1.2 billion from Silver Lake, one of the biggest firms out there.
They returned the fund and more with just one investment off of a faith and a relationship, really more than anything, and a belief in each other.
Integrity is also an interesting example of something notable and, again, somewhat radical that you do around compensation and ownership, and something that you've extended that idea even into your own firm in a different way. Right, so walk me through that.
Brian had the idea that he had 3,000 employees at the time, and you know what? The equity owners of the business, the people that have the stock, are making incredible amounts of money, but the employees are getting paid their salaries. What if we gave them stock?
In 2019, Integrity would do something almost unheard of for a company of their size and potential. They distributed partial ownership in the company to their employee base.
He did that as a private business, And I thought, that's a way to solve for a lot of the ills of the corporate world and how people see the world, as building equity inside the employee base. And I loved that. And I think we've done it in our firm as well, and kind of more distributed partnership and trying to give equity out. Ownership, not just held by two people. Because what that does is it allows for generational mindset.
Steve's work with growing players into business people mirrors the work he's doing at his own firm. There, he and Lawson are nurturing the next generation of investors at HGGC, and they're thinking of how his legacy will live on in the world of private equity through those younger executives.
This is a place where there are 25-ish investment professionals, and every single one of us is welcome to bring our ideas to the table, and those ideas are heard. So we meet every Friday for investment committee, and it's not just the investment committee, it's not the 5 or 10 partners that meet, it's the entire firm. And a lot of places that's not the case.
A good friend ran a famous private equity firm nearby, and he said, your culture is what I want our firm to be like. Well, what do you do? I said, well, the first thing you got to do is your founders need to put all of their relationships in the middle, and no one owns anything. And you don't fight over those relationships. They're the firms. The 15 seconds, he's like, yeah, that's not going to work. So,
he's like, I'm out.
I'm out. So it's like the culture has to be kind of in the roots, and that resonates with people.
Passing down this spirit of abundance approach to private equity all came from Steve's playing days and his Hall of Fame coach, Bill Walsh.
I watched him do it in the late 80s. There's a guy with a camera, the old school, big thing on his back, and he'd follow Bill around everywhere, filming Bill as he spoke to the team, went out on the practice field, installed the offense in the lunchroom. And I kept asking, what is this, like a museum they're doing, or what are they doing, a special documentary? Like, no one knew. Well, what it was he was creating a physical toolkit of video-based, audio-based of all his speeches, and all of his playbooks and all of his installations, everything paper-based that he had, and essentially wrapping it all up as a toolkit to hand it to his assistant coaches that he wanted to go have success in the league. Who takes all their secrets, all the things that makes them great at the height of their greatness, 3 or 4 generations ahead of everybody else in the league, and wraps it up and hands it to the people who are leaving to go coach other places, and then says to them, you know what, I'll see you in the championship game. And it happened. There's a spirit to legacy. There's a spirit to, and so I watched it. And I said to him, Bill, why would you do that? And he said, Steve, we've got to give opportunity. I want these men to succeed. And I thought, that's a heck of a statement, because of course you do. But who does the actual work to give them the opportunity to go succeed and giving away what you own that is most valuable? Is that great business? They would love that. You can make an argument that maybe that is the great business that we need to be in.
The top names in climate change are on Bloomberg.
I want everybody committed to the kind of action that we need. We have a global emergency now. We're still putting 162 million tons of man-made global warming pollution into the sky every day, using the sky as an open sewer. That's trapping as much extra heat as would be released by 600,000 Hiroshima-class atomic bombs exploding every day. That's what the scientists tell us, and the data shows it. That's crazy. That's why we have a third of Pakistan underwater. That's why we have the historic heat wave in China. Nothing comparable to that ever. That's why the heat records are broken every year. And we're seeing an increase in the flows of climate refugees crossing international borders that are due to vastly expand unless we take action to solve the climate crisis.
Nobody covers climate change like Bloomberg, your global business authority. From our studios in New York and San Francisco, our expert hosts have the data and analysis about the companies you know and the startups to watch, plus the interviews you don't want to miss. Watch Caroline Hyde and Ed Ludlow on Bloomberg Technology, the only daily business show dedicated to tech, right in the middle of the trading action. 12 p.m. on the East Coast, 9 a.m. in the West. Only on Bloomberg Television, your global business authority. Bloomberg UK, your source for news and analysis covering the biggest challenges facing the UK government, economy, financial services, and markets.
Tax cuts should not be the priority. It's about a credible plan for growth over the next 2-3 years.
In this post-Brexit world, how do you see actually servicing your clients?
It was disruptive, and it's going to have implications to how capital raising works.
Now we're having the perfect storm in the UK.
Watch Francine Lacqua Thursdays at 9:30 a.m. only on Bloomberg, your global business authority.
It's hard to think of any athlete better known or more polarizing than Alex Rodriguez.
He's done it again! He swatted the ball out of a Royals hit. See ya! He joins the 3,000 hit club.
A three-time MVP, 14-time All-Star, and World Series champion, he retired in 2016 as the highest-paid player in MLB history, fourth all-time on the list of home runs. But his playing career isn't likely to be remembered by those statistics or by who he is or isn't dating.
A record suspension tonight for baseball star Alex Rodriguez over his use of performance-enhancing drugs.
You say you did not do these PEDs that they're accusing you of doing.
You're correct, Mike.
Okay.
This dude is unbelievable. A phony to the end.
While it was the most painful time of my life, it may cost me the Hall of Fame. And that's on me, nobody else. I think in a weird way, I'm going to look back and say that's also one of the best things that happened.
5 years after his retirement, Alex Rodriguez, the CEO, is getting back into sports, this time as an owner of a pro basketball team. And he wants to build more than just a franchise, but a legacy, maybe with a dose of redemption.
The mistakes made in baseball are done, and I can't go back and fix them. I want to keep a clean record as a father, as a friend, as a business person. And because of those mistakes, I think I have that opportunity, and I'm having the time of my life doing
it. A-Rod, Alex Rodriguez, is buying the Minnesota Timberwolves and the Minnesota Lynx. The purchase price is expected to be in the range of $1.5 billion.
For me, I think making the transition from player to owner is something that's very exciting to me. I'm really excited to bring my experience both in business and in sports and in a locker room and do really, really exciting things and bring a world championship to the city.
In April 2021, Alex Rodriguez joined one of the most exclusive clubs around, folks who own a pro sports team. And while his name and his fame made the headlines, it was his business empire that allowed him to actually close the deal. The easy-to-remember name, A-Rod Corp., it's grown into a diversified investor and operator, taking a cue from mega firms like Blackstone and KKR. A-Rod Corp. Has taken a real estate portfolio and expanded into venture capital and private equity and media, and like any business in 2021, its own SPAC.
I was more lucky than smart. I started investing very small in real estate, simply as a hedge to, as my earning power would close, my real estate would not only appreciate, but create more cash flow. And then I would take that cash flow and I would buy more real estate and other private equity type investments where it generated more cash flow. So as my Yankee income went to zero, hopefully my real estate, my businesses would grow over time.
And while players nowadays are becoming better and better business brands, few are able to achieve the scale as A-Rod Corp has in such a relatively short amount of time. But understanding how that growth happened in business, just like baseball, has to start at home.
Part of what I love about business is you get to build things from nothing, right? Like nothing. So I had 2 hip surgeries, and I never wanted to be the old guy that couldn't get up, the stairs. So I built a flat house, all entertainment on that side, my room here, dad and the girls on this side. But it had to be one story because A, I'm always forgetting things, and B, I didn't want to be like, oh my God, I can't get up the steps because of these hips.
Yeah, I walk around here. I mean, first of all, the art's beautiful, but tons of pictures of you and the girls. And I mean, you've really made a family life for yourself here. Tell me about that.
Well, I'll tell you what, I'm not at home. I'm not a cleanup hitter and I'm not a CEO.
Right.
The girls remind me every day that I work for them.
Yeah.
Daddy, I can see why you play baseball.
People always ask me, what do you do in your life? And I say the 3 Bs. I do baseball, now basketball too, business, and my babies. And that's my happy zone. It's funny, through the pandemic, we spent so much time here. And in my 46 years, the toughest time in the world that I've witnessed. On the other side of that, we were in here and we felt safe and we felt loved. And it was like 90 days of breakfast, lunch, and dinner with my girls. It was a dream come true. They got so sick of my dad jokes, so sick of my dancing. Natasha would at least do TikTok. I've been begging, trying to bribe Ella to do one with me. She goes, Daddy, you have no swag, no drip. I'm not doing anything with you.
A-Rod's dancing may not get his daughter's approval, but his following on social media is huge, with nearly 4 million followers on Instagram alone. That number is larger than his new basketball team, the Yankees, or the Red Sox, not to mention any other single baseball player, current or former.
Who has better taste in music? Whose room is decorated nicer?
What is it that makes you engage the way you do in social?
Jason, a lot of that came through my time during my suspension. I spent a whole year serving a suspension, and in that time, I had an opportunity to turn the lens inward and understand why I was making some of the good choices, the poor choices, the bad choices, and understand kind of conversation, understand storytelling. And it's something that I'm enjoying. It's still fairly new. We're not experts by any means, but every time we look at companies or opportunities or partnerships, it's data-driven and social-driven, and it's been quite a tool for us.
That suspension, which obviously people will forever associate you with. And there's an interesting choice you make there at that moment and then in subsequent moments to not lean out, to not retreat, but to lean in to some extent, and especially in the last couple of years. Tell me about that.
If you think about my career, sure, I've hit home runs and been part of a world championship team, but I'm 5th all-time in the history of strikeouts. I mean, that means that only 4 people in the history of mankind have failed more than me. But I think as a result, I've been, PhD in failing, but also an MBA of getting back up.
Looking around at his house and his selection of cars, it's hard to say that A-Rod has ever really failed. But it's striking what he has built, considering where he came from.
Okay, so you're moving in on me, quick, distracting me with your fancy hands. I'm going to deal with your knight because it's really bothering me.
Ah, my knights.
Yeah, he's a troublemaker.
Yeah.
What did you get up to this weekend?
Just robot stuff. A lot of chess. I was practicing for you. I know you're pretty good. Ooh, I don't like that. I will take this. Put it over here.
Not cool. Not cool. All right. I will concede. I can see. Got me beat.
Very good game. Well played.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Today's CFOs are reshaping the C-suite, positioning companies to meet the next generation of challenges, breaking out of traditional roles.
One of the most important things is looking around the corner.
Look for Chief Future Officer on Bloomberg.
I was born in New York, raised in Miami. So when I got to Miami, I was around 8.5, 9 years old. My father left when I was around 10. And at home, it was mom, my brother Joe, and my sister Susie. They took the role of, like, my brother became like the secretary of sports. My sister became the secretary of education. And my mom just had to, you know, make enough money to pay our bills. I think, you know, my father leaving us at 10 kind of left a huge vacant spot, right? And I think I needed to then kind of fill that void by having a collection of mentors.
One of those earliest mentors was his baseball coach, Rich Hoffman, right here at Westminster High School.
Steve walked through this area a few times.
Oh, yeah. This brings back some pretty cool memories. If you hit a home run here, it goes to the basketball courts and the pool.
Right.
And I kind of like it. It's kind of like got this Fenway, kind of Wrigley
yeah, exactly.
field.
Instead of the green monster, you have the green palms.
Yes,
right?
exactly. Well, it's really where I really started to understand the power of mentorship and dreaming big. And if you think about it, I have one of the most important conversations with Coach Rich Hoffman, and that happened at 15, the first day I walked on campus. He goes, look, Alex, you're gonna come in this year, you're gonna have a good year, and then you're going to the Junior Olympics to represent the US. You'll do well there, you'll get much stronger. By that time, you'll be like the top junior in the country. And then your senior year, you're gonna be the #1 pick in the country. And then you're gonna be off to the big leagues. Coach, you're talking to me? He goes, yeah, I'm talking to you, Alex. And Jason, I went home that night and I believed him. It just like, it changed my complete vision on me and my future. And then I did everything in my power not to let Coach down. So as a leader today, when I have young people, it's my job to not only give them the opportunity, but to push them and push them to a level where they now see the world in a different way about themselves.
That prediction came true. In the 1993 MLB draft, Rodriguez was selected first overall by the Seattle Mariners. And while his playing career was just getting started, by the age of 22, he'd invest in his first piece of real estate.
It was what I knew best. My mother, she wasn't a homeowner. She was, we were renters, right? We were tenants. And every 18 months we would move because the landlord would always raise the rent. And I remember as a young kid saying, boy, if I can ever trade places with the landlord and they can be the tenant, that would be amazing. I bought my first duplex, and then I owned that for a few years. I sold it for double, bought 4-plex, 8-plex, 60 units, and off we went.
When it came to those first investments, you know, whenever he does something, he's going in at 100%.
This is Jose Gomez. Everyone calls him Pepe. Along with Jose Morey, he's the co-CEO of Newport Property Construction and also a childhood friend of Rodriguez.
From 2004 to 2007, we ended up acquiring 5,100 units between Florida and Texas. We renovated them. He would buy them, I would renovate them, and you know, the rest was history.
Being a real estate investor, especially in high-growth markets like Florida, well, it hasn't been a straight line up for the past 2 decades.
Miami's high-rise condos are monuments to a burst property bubble. Almost half of Florida mortgages are underwater.
We had this run up to 2007. Prices were going up like this, and then it just fell off a cliff.
The Great Recession crushed owners and developers alike. few were immune, except those that had other sources of income to take advantage of falling prices. Income like, say, one of the richest baseball contracts in history.
Our huge advantage was that Alex had W-2 income coming in from playing, and we had that staying power. So we were able, even when things started going, south for some people, we were able to grow within those difficult times.
Monument Capital Management has done more than 60 deals since 2012, worth more than $900 million. The extent of that ambition in real estate is evident here at Grand Station in downtown Miami. The 30-story residential tower, complete with a sprawling amenity floor and pool, has sweeping views of downtown. It's a bet on Miami's growth, and it's a bet that's looking smarter as Wall Street firms and other companies look southward.
People always question Miami. Why do people live there? There's not any great jobs. We don't have a lot of financial services here. We don't have anybody manufacturing anything. But that's changing. People see this as a very cool place to live and work. Now, before it was always a cool place to live, but where are you going to work? Now it's okay, the jobs are here first.
Cool place to visit in the past.
Right, yeah.
And now each pocket is being built out. I think Art Basel years and years ago started that, and then there have been a course of events that have followed that continue to enrich Miami, and I would say we're still early as a city.
But while Miami may be home base, Rodriguez's most aggressive current real estate project is buying, renovating, and renting out single-family homes in markets across the country. And in this case, he's not just emulating some of the world's biggest investors, but also getting into business with them, including real estate legend Barry Sternlicht. Just as behemoths like Blackstone have amassed single-family homes, Rodriguez, through the Tiber Capital Group, has snapped up 5,000 homes so far.
We think we're still in the early innings of single-family housing. Rents are going up about 18 to 19%. Once we find something, then, this I learned from Warren Buffett is, be disciplined, but when you find your pitch, don't go for a single or a double. Go in and go in big, and that's exactly what we've done, multifamily, and now with single-family houses.
Going big has required Rodriguez to build a team around him, and he's opted for a delicate balance of homegrown and outside hires. On the one side, friends dating back to childhood and adolescence, including Aaron, Pepe, and Jose. On the other, newer additions such as Kelly Laferriere, Stuart Zook, David Becker, and Lisa Pyer. Managing the chemistry among the small and growing team is akin to the elusive intangibles Rodriguez saw in clubhouses when he was a player. Getting it right? Well, that's the difference between being a champion and an also-ran.
Lisa, take it away.
Sure. So I think next we're going to have data on Timberwolves from Kelly. Awesome. And BCP as it relates to Timberwolves and Glenn.
Cool. So teams 11-11, and one exciting development is the 12-17 game against the Lakers is going to be on ESPN. So we were not on the ESPN schedule, now we are.
At the A-Rod Corp offices, you'll notice the memorabilia, the pictures of famous athletes, the real-time social data being displayed on a TV wall. But you'll also see pictures of Rodriguez with some of the biggest businessmen in the world.
Alex has become a sponge, and he started that as an active player. When he was on the road, he would go and visit the Jerry Reinsdorfs of the world in his uniform and ask them business questions. And he's surrounded himself with really good, smart people.
The wide network is critical in sourcing deals, including in the venture world, where the A-Rod portfolio has included more than 60 companies, brands like Hims & Hers, GoPuff, and UFC gyms. But having the best team doesn't mean you win every at-bat. Their SPAC, Slam Corp, was recently negotiating a roughly $3 billion deal to merge with collectible company Panini. That didn't materialize after Panini stumbled. Slam's still in search of a target. But Rodriguez's belief in taking swings, striking out, and hitting big is also the same way he would end up with his own sports franchise.
biggest challenges facing the UK government, economy, financial services, and markets.
Tax cuts should not be the priority. It's about a credible plan for growth over the next 2-3 years.
In this post-Brexit world, how do you see actually servicing your clients?
It was disruptive, and it's going to have implications to how capital raising works.
Now we're having the perfect storm in the UK.
Watch Francine Lacqua Thursdays at 9:30 a.m. only on Bloomberg, your global business authority.
From New York City,
From London, in Sydney,
from Washington,
in Tokyo.
9 a.m. in Beijing and Shanghai.
Good morning, everyone.
Have a great evening. Here's what I'm watching. You do not want to miss this story.
Is there the kind of upside?
J-Lo and A-Rod are angling to buy the New York Mets.
They're not just angling. I mean, they are in the process of putting the money together.
Rodriguez, along with a group that included his then-girlfriend Jennifer Lopez, entrepreneur Mark Lurie, and several others, mounted a bid against frontrunner and hedge fund billionaire Stephen A. Cohen.
These guys are all rich, you know, as far as we go. They've made millions and millions of dollars, but we're talking about billions here.
The very public process ultimately landed A-Rod and J-Lo's consortium as the runner-up, with Cohen buying the team for $2.4 billion.
We were a little bit depressed about it. We don't like to lose, and you know, we started getting really excited and thinking about what could be. And so when it just sort of came to a complete halt, there was sort of like this shock to the system. We were sort of depressed and down.
Mark Lurie is a New York-born businessman who most recently had been a senior executive at Walmart. He'd gotten there by selling his company, Jet.com, to the mega retailer and stayed on to run that division. And while A-Rod's partnership with J-Lo would come undone, he formed a close business and personal connection with Lurie that's lasted.
House rules, man. I told you, no ties, man.
That's my favorite tie. We grew up in a sort of very similar way, and from very, very humble beginnings.
I love Mark. I love him like a brother, and he's a great partner and a great friend. And you know, he sleeps at my house, I sleep at his house, and we both have this drive and this mission that I want him to win in the worst way, and I think he does the same for me.
I want to show you this clip because it spoke to me a lot about the depth of your relationship.
Yeah, I think this is getting a little bit deeper now, but I think it comes down to our dads. You know, we both felt like, you know, we had something to prove in order to sort of feel love, really. And when you did something spectacular, you felt, oh, maybe, you know, like, and I think he similarly had felt that too, where if you wanted to feel love, you had to do big things.
Mm-hmm. What do you make of that?
I never thought about it that way, but I know that when my father left at 10, it left a huge hole in my heart and my stomach, and I knew that I had to do better. And I think before therapy, it was probably better for the wrong things. I think post and current, I look at it as just my purpose. But I also know that I'm enough now. And probably before that, I thought I wasn't.
The deep connection with Lurie led to a new $400 million venture fund called VCP, and notably allowed them to quickly pivot to a successful deal in sports ownership, their pursuit of the Minnesota Timberwolves and Minnesota Lynx.
He called me and he said, hey, are you serious about this? He said, I won't do it unless you're serious about it. And I said, I'm serious about it. Are you serious about it? And again, a minute conversation, we're both in, and we probably got the deal done in 6 or 7 days.
NBA ownership has radically transformed in the past decade, as tech executives like Steve Ballmer and Joe Tsai and Wall Street investors like Mark Lazary, Josh Harris, and Tony Ressler have snapped up teams.
There's a supply-demand imbalance where anyone, you know, most people, if they could, would own a professional sports team, and there's, you know, very high barriers to entry and, you know, very limited supply.
In the case of the Timberwolves, Glenn Taylor bought the team in 1994 for $88 million. The sale to Rodriguez's group values the franchise, paired with the four-time WNBA champion Lynx, at $1.5 billion. And that's relatively affordable. A-Rod's old team, the Yankees, is worth more than $5 billion, according to several estimates. And while ownership is changing, so too are the players.
I think players today want more in every sport. They're into fashion. They want to be good investors. They want to learn about venture. The NBA players today that I've been around, some of them are more prepped at 20 than some of the guys that I played with were at 50. And meeting with our athletes and talking about business and them reaching out to me, it's great, it's humbling, and it's really impressive.
And if anything, their ownership has maybe gotten too close to the players, with the team being fined $250,000 for violating league rules with an off-season workout in A-Rod's hometown of Miami. But buying a basketball team instead of the Mets might accomplish a goal he thought was unreachable, actually making him cool to his daughters.
I recently went to a Sixers game, and my little one, Ella, who's 13, she goes, "Dad, I really like this basketball thing. Like, one day, maybe I get to, run the business here one day."
Really?
And I was like, oh my God, that's like the greatest thing I've ever heard. And she goes, it's like, baseball's a little slower, but this stuff, I can really get into it. I said, whoa, baseball's great too. It's just, it's more of a thinking man's game. It's like chess, not checkers. And she goes, yeah, whatever. I don't like chess either. But she says, this basketball thing, I have like real passion is like the entertainment, and I have thoughts and I have ideas, and she thinks much more like a producer. She likes dancing. And I mean, to me, that's just like, boy, that's the great thing about sports and music. It brings people together. And it certainly did that for us that night.
You have built this amazing business. Yet there are people who are watching this just like, this guy. It's like that they'll always remember you for your baseball career, and a baseball career that was this controversial, to say the least. You could be living on an island somewhere. You don't have to do this.
I thought about tapping out a bunch of times. I would wake up in the middle of the night and be in tears going like, how in the world do I get pocket aces and figure out a way to screw this up? That was a very painful time for me. And I think the year suspension allowed me to not only put lipstick on the house and paint it and fix the windows, it allowed me to tear the entire house down and start building it one brick at a time. And in that process, I became even closer to my daughters. And when I think about those mistakes and the lessons learned, I think about, okay, but you know what? That was baseball. And I had good moments and I had very tough moments. But clean slate when it comes to being a father, to being a partner, to being a businessman, to being a friend. So I draw some incredible motivation through, something that sucked, something that I did to myself. I say to myself in the darkest hour, boy, if I ever get another opportunity, I'm not gonna screw that up again. And I'm trying my best not to do that.
This is Bling Bang.
one of the ones we're working on at the moment is how do we charge back into Ukraine as soon as the European authorities say it's safe to fly in Ukraine again. Now, nobody knows when that is going to be. But we were Ukraine's second largest airline when the Russians invaded on the 24th of February last year. We would be Ukraine's biggest airline.